TimberScan's AP routing and approval process begins at the point where an invoice arrives at your door. There are several ways in which to acquire invoices into the system. We'll begin by showing you how you can drag and drop or use other means. To acquire an invoice, you choose the Acquire function, you choose Acquire Images, and it opens up a viewer. On the viewer, you're able to drag and drop documents and acquire them this way. You can then size the document if you need to. So if, for example, I want to look at both this document and the succeeding document, I can do so. I can split documents if there, for some reason, two documents came in the same PDF. So drag and drop is one option. Second option would be to use a scanning device. So invoices that arrive in the mail, you would scan them, and then the acquire process would work very much the same as it does with drag and drop. The third option would be using email monitoring. With email monitoring, the system will monitor an email address, it will take the attachment from the email, and then it will automatically acquire it into the application. There are two steps to this. One, it can acquire into a file. The second option is it can acquire automatically and assign it directly to the person in data entry that it needs to go to. So in that scenario, basically what would happen is the invoices would be acquired, they would be assigned to someone in data entry, and it would completely bypass the entire acquire process. Once the invoices have been acquired, the next step in the process is to go to invoice entry and start processing invoices. Now there are several options with respect to processing invoices. One option is that the user can key in the invoice from start to finish. So in this case, as I'm selecting the information and I'm processing and I'm looking for power equipment rental, I'm searching the vendor file from Sage 300. All of the master files within TimberScan are linked to Sage 300, so there's no syncing process. It's going directly to Sage to find that information. In terms of compliance, if the system is using compliance, they're using the compliance system, it will then bring up compliance warnings on the screen. As I plug in the invoice number, if it's a duplicate invoice, it will stop me immediately and let me know that there's a duplicate invoice. This again speaks to the integration with Sage. What I could do potentially, if I wanted to, is I could go back and I could search and I can find a history of all of the invoices for that particular vendor. If I wanted to focus in on that duplicate invoice, I can see pertinent information. As I call up the detail information, I can see how the invoice was coded. If I hover the mouse on any of these key fields, TimberScan will provide a tooltip that shows what certain information about that particular field. For example, with the commitment, I can see the original committed amount, any change orders, what has been paid, what's been invoiced in the balance. With a job, I can see the revised contract amount of the job and the job to date billings, and so forth. The other option, I can also call up the original invoice image. In this case, someone put a sticky note on the invoice. I have all of the supporting documents behind the invoice, and I have an approval page which shows an audit log of every iteration of that particular invoice. In this case, because I have a duplicate invoice, I will simply go ahead and append it. We'll continue on and plug in additional information. As I'm processing the invoice against commitments or jobs, I again have the ability to go through the Sage system and search for that information. I'll call up a commitment in this case. I can choose the line items for that particular commitment, and then the system goes through and it populates the invoice entry screen with the line item information associated with that commitment. That's how simple and easy it is for me to go through the process of acquiring information related to the job. It provides me with a summary of information associated with the commitment. If the commitment, if we are overcommitted at this point, the system will present me with warnings and let me know that we are overbalanced. At this point, if I wanted to go ahead and accept the invoice, it would route that invoice off to the approvers. Now, one other step involved here, along with a number of other controls, such as supporting documents, which I could call up and I can attach other documents to that particular invoice. History, I can also email, if I wanted to email this, if I had correspondence that I wanted to email off to someone. I can provide annotations on the document at any point in time, and I can also add comments to the document. One other option is potentially not having to key in the information associated with the invoice. In that case, what I would do is I would set up what's called a capture template. So basically the way this works is that I would go through the process of acquiring a vendor's invoice, and then once I've acquired the vendor's invoice, I could choose to set up a template. With the template, it's basically just taking the invoice image and providing me with a menu where I can simply go through the process of defining where certain information is on the document. So in the case of the invoice number, I'm simply highlighting that field, and then I'm moving on to invoice date, balance due, and so forth. Once I've defined a template, the next time that I acquire an invoice for that particular vendor, what will happen is that it will assign that particular invoice to the data entry person, and instead of having to go through the process of keying in the invoice, as I did with power equipment rental, on the next invoice, the one for HD Supply, all of the information associated with that invoice has already been coded. If I needed to provide additional coding or make any modifications, I can do so. But basically, in many cases, the invoices have been pre-coded, and I can simply go through the process of accepting and sending that invoice off to the approver. One of the key aspects of TimberScan is once invoices have been routed to approvers, the ability to be able to track and monitor where those invoices are at any given time. So there are a number of ways that we can provide information to the client to be able to show them. For example, with our reports menu, I could simply call up a report. In this case, it's an invoice status report. This is showing me that I have 109 outstanding invoices and the dollar amount. But because the reports have drill down capability, I can drill further in. I can see the information for each of the approvers, and then if I want to drill in and focus in on a particular approver, I can see exactly what that approver has assigned to them, and I have all of the pertinent information associated with it. Another option that I can choose, which many clients tend to use, is the ability to compile backup for a time and material or cost plus billing. Through our inquiry menu, I could simply call up a job cost inquiry, put in my pertinent date information and what job it may be associated with, and I am able to go through and select that particular job. It builds what looks like an Excel spreadsheet. I can include or exclude certain line items if I want, but ultimately what I'm able to do is I have compiled a list of AP invoices with the invoice image that I can then click on the report menu and I can download those images. So again, the process begins with the acquire, goes through the data entry, and then gets to the point where the approver then would be reviewing the invoices. So let's go to the approval side and we'll walk through an approval process. An approver logs in. They can log in on their desktop, or they can use any type of mobile device to be able to approve their invoices. In this case, the system provides us with a dashboard at the outset that I can look at, and I can quickly isolate and see how many invoices I have in my queue. But as I call up the invoices, it calls up those particular invoice images on the screen. If I have security access, I can go through the process of approving the invoice right here on the screen. Or if I want to edit the invoice, I simply touch the invoice image. I see the notes that have already been associated with the invoice, and then I have a number of controls that I can use in order to be able to process the invoice. For example, if I wanted to look at the distributions that have been coded to this invoice so far, I can call them up. If I needed to see pertinent information about the job, I have the tooltip information available to me on the job, the commitment, the cost code, any of those particular fields. If I needed to add another line item, I can go through and I can add a line item. So it gives me the ability to not only modify coding, but also add additional line item information if I need to. In addition, I could approve the invoice. I can see the notes and add more notes. I could reject the invoice, route it to another approver on the fly if I needed to, put the invoice on hold, and I can also correspond by way of email to other approvers. Again, the key to this particular approval system called TimberScan Go is the ability to be able to approve in any type of environment, whether it's on the desktop, in a browser, or if I wanted to approve on my phone or on an iPad, I can do so. Once the invoices have been approved, typically where they reside is in final review. Final review can either approve the invoices one by one, or final review could also call their invoices up in a dashboard. With the dashboard, I can simply go through and I can highlight, for example, what invoices have been routed to me as the final reviewer. And then if I want to just call up those particular invoices and send them to Sage 300, I can do so from there. Once the invoices have been processed and they've been posted in Sage 300, the next step in the process would be to take the invoices and process checks. Once the check processing is done within Sage, those checks can then be attached to the invoices in TimberScan. So as we go back to TimberScan, the checks have been processed. I choose the checks EFT program. If those checks were printed out on CheckStock, I can manually attach them. If the client is using one of our automated programs, they can auto-attach. So for example, if they were using Piracle's Create a Check, we can attach the documents right from the Piracle file. On a manual attachment, I'm simply just scanning the checks in, acquiring them, and then I can take each check image and the system will ripple through the entire batch of checks and it will attach each check image to each invoice image. Ultimately, what this allows me to do is in Sage 300, I could call up the vendor, and as I'm doing research on the vendor, I can look at the invoice, any of the supporting documents, and the check all together. So it compiles a packet of information that is available to the user not only in TimberScan, but also in Sage 300. And that is a review of the routing and approval process for TimberScan. Thank you very much for watching.